Okay, so the last lecture was about the subphylum Vertebrata and the phylum Chordata. What are the things that make chordates? And actually, the last lecture was about the other subphyla inside of this phylum Chordata, Tunicata, Cephalochordata. And then today we start talking about the vertebrates, and which include the cartilaginous fishes here, the chondrichthyes. Um, the fishes are the oldest group of extant vertebrata, and we're going to break them up into two lectures, largely because of the diversity of this group. There's about approximately 60,000 species of vertebrates, and half of those are fishes. And so this is a big group, and so we will, give it ample treatment. Okay. Some themes that weave throughout this two lecture sequence on fishes. One is, again, this why are there so many different types of fishes? What is the reason for the diversity? We'll talk about the challenges of life in water as a physical environment. How do they move, feed, how do they maintain buoyancy, how do they use their gills to extract enough oxygen from the water. That was the end of the last lecture, was talking about these different characteristics of the chordates, and particularly the vertebrates, and how does that relate to being bigger and more active. And so one of those things is your cells are more active, they need more ATP. To get that ATP, you have to oxidize your glucose efficiently, so you need a lot of oxygen, right? And we'll talk about some interesting osmotic challenges faced by fishes, whether they live in the freshwater or saltwater, or fish that span both of those types of habitats. And then we'll talk about what makes certain type of fish more likely to be imperiled than other species. Okay, important classification. Important. This is basically a list of the type of taxa that you need to know. So we have Animalia kingdom, phylum, chordata, subphylum, vertebrata, and then before we get to class, kingdom, phylum, class, there's this thing in between subphylum and class called the superclass. And these agnathans are jawless fishes. Agnath means jawed. Gnathostome, so the superclass Gnathostomata. So around their mouth they have jaws. So we're going to talk about mostly talk about these jawless fishes today, and then the origin of the jaws. Next time we'll talk about these groups of jawed fishes. And you should know where those groups fall in this, particularly this or the next phylogeny, right? So we talked about supraclass Agnatha, superclass Gnathostomata, and then chondrichthyes, osteichthyes, so on and so forth. Where do they fall out onto this cladogram? Okay. So both show kind of the same thing, but we'll see the common ancestor of chordates. Probably would have been something like that Pikaia, similar to a lancelet. And we've got one major branch here, the superclass, that includes the two living groups, the lampreys and hagfishes. These are jawless fishes. What we see is there used to be a lot more jawless fishes. They were in this group called the Strachoderms, but they went extinct at the end of the Devonian period. And then we get this other branch of chordates, which includes the jawed fishes and other vertebrates. So we have the chondrichthyes, the cartilaginous fishes, which have survived to modern day. We have the bony fishes here. We have the bony fishes that include the ray fin fishes, most of the fishes that we see, and then the other branch here are the lobe fin fishes, and a branch of those. So that's really just the history of life and the history of vertebrates is just a series of splits and branches. Adaptation, reproductive isolation at a large scale. We have these different, natural selection for different environments, and then this goes on to, right, we would find ourselves here in this branch, the amniotes. Okay. So spend some time with this. This is a really informative and useful infographic. Same thing here. We can talk about the branches that are the jawless, and the branch that is the jawed fishes, and the branch that is the cartilaginous, and the branch that is the bony fishes, and then the lobe fin fishes, including the tetrapods. Okay, so we would be in this branch here. We're a tetrapod, but we're all related. Okay, so again, here is your cladogram question for the next test. Would be these groups, which I've already pointed out, these groups here, now where they fall out on these, particularly this cladogram, and these shared derived characters, where do they fall on the branch? Right? Who do they apply to? Who has a cranium? Who has placoid scales? So on and so forth. So, why so many fishes? Why so many fishes? Well, number one, there's a lot of water. There's a lot of different types of water. There's deep sea, surf, intertidal type of habitats. There's estuaries. There's reefs. There is freshwater rivers and streams and lakes and creeks. So all those different habitats have different environmental conditions that allow for adaptation and specialization. Right? So you see fishes are very finely tuned to their environment, just like every animal. They have these anatomical and physiological adaptations. Even if they are splitting at the same rate, they have been around a lot longer, and so they're accumulating a greater number of species just from the standpoint of time. Vicariant events. These are events which take a habitat and split it into two, and take one population and split it into two. And we talked about the idea of allopatric speciation being the most common type of speciation. So these vicariant events do end up splitting populations and leading to allopatric speciation. And sexual selection is also very important in fishes. And it's kind of a difficult concept in a way to think how that would work, but because the speciation is related to the evolution of reproductive isolating mechanisms, if animal is really cued on sexual selection, a small change could lead to a totally different reproductively isolated population. Supraclass Agnatha, class Myxine. These are the hagfishes, very bizarre, old, ancient group of fishes. They are deep sea marine. No, we don't have freshwater hagfishes. They're scavengers, and they have these weird, large mucus glands. They have we have a pair or 3 pairs of semicircular canals. They only have 1. These have just traces of a lateral line system. Their mouth, while it has these tooth-like structures, they're no true teeth, and they don't have a jaw to open and close their mouth and ingest food. So they use these plates, and that basically limits them in what they can eat. Right? They're not chasing down large prey items because they don't have the jaws to do it. So they're sort of relegated to living in the deep sea and ingesting things like, I've heard stories about a dead whale falling down from the top of the ocean, falling on the bottom. Damn it. And that's great food for hagfishes. I was going to show you this video. These things produce, it's a very strange protein that when the protein hits water, it's very hydrophilic. The water gloms onto it and it produces a large volume of this mucal slime. And it actually went up. There's a video of a shark grabbing onto a hagfish, and the hagfish just basically explodes this slime, and it gets into their gill slits and probably can suffocate the shark. So that's a pretty neat adaptation shared by hagfishes. Another class, Cephalaspidamorphae, sometimes known as Petromyzontoidea. These are the lampreys, again, jawless fishes, both marine and freshwater. A few more species of these, still not a huge diversity. The hagfish is the only invertebrate vertebrate. I'll say that again. Hagfishes do not have vertebrae. They don't have bony vertebrae. So they are in the subphylum Vertebrata, but they don't have vertebrae. Lampreys are the first group of vertebrates to have vertebrae. And most of these things make a living as parasites. I'll show you pictures of this. But there are some species, like the ones around here, are non-feeding as adults, and they have like kind of filter feeding juveniles. We'll probably see some at BioBlitz. Yeah. The water has to flow over the gills. It's tidal ventilation, so i.e. there is no active pumping of water over their gills. They have to be in the current so the water can flow over their gills. And you think about this is related to being jawless, because most fishes use their jaw fluttering, opening, expanding the buccal cavity to draw water over their gills. And because they don't have jaws, that's not really possible. And oftentimes they're attached onto another fish anyways. Many lampreys are anadromous. So with that, there's catadromous, which are things like eels, which spawn in the ocean. Many of these lampreys and also salmon, freshwater is where they spawn, and then most of their life they spend in the ocean. Right? A lot of the juveniles attach onto a stone and just filter feed as juveniles. So let's see some pictures of lampreys. See, there's that oral disc with the little teeth-like structures. This is lake trout, and you can see where one of these lampreys was attached. And they rasp and they suck. They eat some of the flesh, but mostly subsist on the blood and exudates of the fish here. Okay, Alfred Romer, one of the great anatomists of our time, he said basically the greatest of all advances in vertebrate history was the development of jaws and the subsequent revolution in the mode of life of early fishes. Okay, and so what Romer is really saying here, if we go back and we look, right, here's the advent of vertebrates. First vertebrates would have been jawless. And what do we have left? We have a few species of lamprey, a few species of hagfish. All the rest of the vertebrates, including cartilaginous, bony fishes, all of the other tetrapods, including amniotes, they all were in this lineage that branches off here. And that lineage is united by the presence of jaws. Okay, and so you see these key adaptations at times. When it pops up, it seems to make many different modes of living possible, right? If you're a lamprey, then you have to be a parasite. If you're a hagfish, you have to be a scavenger. But you can't be predators. All these different things that the rest of the vertebrates can do because they have jaws. Okay. So it's the interesting question comes up is, where did the jaw come from, right? And it's just a truism that these structures don't just come, some random mutation creates this very complex type of structure like a jaw. There's something pre-existing that is modified and used for a different function. Okay, very important theme in biology is that complex structures do not appear from nowhere. They exist for some other function, and then they're sort of co-opted, and the genes that develop them are co-opted and used to make something different but similar. Okay, and the story here is we can look at this agnathous jawless fish, like either a hagfish or a lamprey, and we see the gill slits, we see these gill arch supports, and these are cartilaginous and they're sort of rigid, and they help to keep the gills spread out and supported so that they don't just collapse in on themselves. The gill arches hold the gills up at each gill slit and allow the water to flow over them. And these jawless fishes have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pairs of gill arches, one on this side, one on the other side. The jawed fishes have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 total. And, well, actually, I should say they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these gill arches. The first two, the evidence suggests that the first two gill support arches were modified into the jaw. Okay, this would be like the hyoid arch that supports the jaw, and then the mandible that becomes the jaw. Okay, so this and this, some are lost. The genes for those are just silenced. They mutate and they're just silenced. The genes for these maybe turn on earlier, stay on longer, and these gill arches become larger and more bony, and they turn into the jaws. Okay. So again, jawless fish would have had these gill arches, but perhaps they start to be used for a slightly different purpose, maybe for scraping, right? And then it's fairly complex because you have to have muscular attachment, ligaments, all of this kind of thing. But there's a lot of evidence that this is true. So why would natural selection favor those genes and push evolution in this direction? Why would natural selection favor a fish that has slightly bigger gill arches that are sort of like the pseudo jaw? What's advantageous about that? Right? Why would those genes be increased in the population? And obviously, the one thing is, the most obvious thing is just it allows the fishes to feed in a variety of ways, allows them to become predatory and eat other fishes and other invertebrates, other chordates, which is going to allow you to gain more energy and produce more eggs and have more babies, right? But also just the variety of ways that fish can feed. There's a lot of specializations that fish show, and it can exploit new types of sources of nutrients, right? It allows fish to dig, right? Which can maybe allow them to build nests that would, if you have a nest and the guy next to you doesn't, then maybe your offspring survive better and therefore your genes are passed on. Again, carrying rocks and vegetation may be about building nest. grasping baits would allow you to, it's increasing your fitness. Remember, fitness, evolutionary fitness is how many babies you have. The more babies you have, the more likely your genes are to be passed on. And if you can grab onto a female and ensure yourself access to that mating opportunity, you probably have more babies than the next guy, right? A lot of fish, the offspring live in the mouth of the fish. That provides some protection for the offspring. And then finally, and I probably, this should probably be up on the top here, because this one is very important. More efficient respiration. So what we're talking about there is if you have jaws, or even like somewhat functional jaws, again, this in between a jawless and a shark, if you can open and close your mouth and use that to pump water into your mouth and over your gills, you will be able to obtain more oxygen, which allows you to be more active. And right, then that's obvious how that would affect your fitness. Right, so this one's very important. This idea of obtaining more oxygen with the use of gills, or jaws and gills. So those are the things that would make the jawed fish more selectively fit than one without. This happened about 450 million years ago, and it's possible that it happened quickly in large jumps, macroevolutionary jumps. And so we could see this as being a mutation in those genes that code for the development of the gill arches. If the gene, rather than the gene just having small tweaks, a lot of times in evolution we see that gene gets doubled, and the protein that the gene codes for is made in twice the number, twice the volume, which can result in some cases, like the protein may be a bone morphogenesis protein, BMP. When those are present, bone is forming. And so you could see where, you basically, you don't just go from a little bit of gill arch to a little bit more. You go from a little bit of gill arch to a lot of gill arch. Or possibly it's more of the gradual changes, right? I'm not sure really where the evidence comes down on this, but suffice to say, it was off to the races. Suddenly an entirely new superclass of vertebrates is born, and those are the gnathostomes, the jawed vertebrates, including sharks, the bony fishes, and then all the tetrapods. This includes those lobe-finned fishes. And so that's where we're going to pick up next time, is talking about the jawed fishes that are in the chondrichthyes. Right, so here's those first two gill arches, the remaining ones supporting the gills. We have the vertebrate condition where we have the notochord become surrounded by bony elements during development. The notochord in most vertebrates actually disappears, and left behind is the vertebrae, which surround the dorsal hollow nerve cord. We have that post-anal tail, and again the pharyngeal slits and the endostyle, which seems to have evolved into the thyroid gland in most vertebrates. This number 6 is talking about the different internal organs, which you've seen in lab are just a shared homologous set of organs we all have. So I'm going to end this here and can this lecture for the Thursday group. That would be Thursday, March 25th, and we'll see you guys again soon.